tell me about visceral fat and how we can specifically reduce visceral fat.
As I'd mentioned earlier, visceral fat is very genetically predetermined. And so if you're extremely lean, right, you're not going to have a ton of visceral fat. The problem is when we eat excess calories, what does our body do with the excess? And in an ideal world, the excess calories are just going in our subcutaneous. So that's the space underneath our skin, as opposed to the space inside of our abdomen. And uh, just population norms, men tend to put a lot more of that excess fat inside of their gut. And that's why you see the men with the pot bellies as they get older, and women in general tend to put more in their lower extremities, in their thighs, and their butt. And that's in general a safer place for it to be. But there's always exceptions to that rule. As you mentioned, for gestational diabetes, there is an increased risk of developing diabetes for somebody who has had gestational diabetes. It's not a one-to-one correlation, but there's an increased risk, and it has to do with this fuel partitioning. Where are we putting the excess calories genetically? And so the second part of your question is the kind of tougher one, which was, well, what do I do if I have excess calories in my gut? It turns out you can't spot train. So in order for you to reduce the excess fat deposition in the gut, you have to lose excess fat everywhere in your body. So there's it's not quite as simple as that, because if you carry a lot of lean muscle mass, it negates the effect of some of the excess fat in the gut. Anytime that our blood glucose goes up, it is our musculature that is taking up the excess sugar in our bloodstream. And after it's saturated and it's taken up all that it can, then our liver starts converting the sugar to fat deposition. So there are people who have a body fat percentage for a man, if their body fat percentage is say 28% or 30%, we know that's a relatively high body fat percentage, but they also have a ton of lean muscle mass. They might be at the 80th or 90th percentile for lean muscle mass, and hence they don't actually metabolically have a problem. But as they get older and their lean muscle mass goes down, because partially from the aging process, mostly just because we become sedentary and we're not as physically active. Now that ratio of lean muscle mass to visceral fat has changed, and that balance, unfortunately, predisposes the patient to developing impaired glucose tolerance and hypertension. And so there's multiple strategies on what to do, but generally, I tell my patients that we've got to long-term increase your muscle mass and long-term decrease your total body fat percentage. I don't care about what your actual total body fat percentage is, right? That's a cosmetic issue. People have an idea of, I want to be able to fit into these clothes, or when I was 25, I weighed this amount. Great. Those are great goals, but the real goal is your body composition correct for you? And correct for you means that you're not at risk for developing metabolic syndrome. Beyond that, then it's cosmetics, and what a patient wants to look like.
Hi, everyone. If you've enjoyed this interview thus far, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button below. It not only helps the channel, but helps out all the people that we interview. Thanks for watching. You mentioned losing weight overall is how you're going to decrease your visceral fat. So, going to the gym and doing 100, planks or crunches or whatever is not going to necessarily, it may get you more toned in that area, but it's not going to actually reduce the visceral fat that's in the gut itself. So when you talk about reducing visceral fat through weight loss overall, do you feel like nutrition is more important than exercise? Or kind of where do you, as someone who practices this, where do you place value?
So, you've probably heard people say, a six pack is made in the kitchen, not at the gym. And there's truth to that. I don't want to oversimplify because there's quite a bit of nuance in nutrition science. And the model of calories in versus calories out is the only thing that matters. It's not quite an accurate statement. It's close, but it's not everything. Because of the way our stress hormones work, our sleep habits, there's a little bit more nuance to that conversation. But in a guiding principle, I would say that if we find out that, okay, you have high cholesterol, you already have impaired glucose tolerance, or you have hypertension, and I know that your visceral body fat percentage is elevated, and you have to lose whatever it is, 4% body fat to get these numbers to where they need to be. That's the initial primary goal. The initial primary goal is through nutrition. How are we going to reduce this? And there's any number of diets out there, and many of them do have merit. But the end goal for all of these diets is that it has to be something that's actually sustainable and in a healthy manner. So whether it's the Mediterranean diet, the Mind diet, the carnivore diet, I mean, I have my preferences, and some of these are more science backed than others, but what's most sustainable for the patient, it turns out, is probably what's gonna work. No one has figured out yet what the true ideal diet for a human being is, and there's a reason for that. We evolved in many different areas of the world simultaneously, and we took advantage of whatever food sources there were available in our local environment. So if you live by the sea, you fished, right? If you lived in a jungle, you ate, you primarily had a plant-based diet, right? If you were in a place where there was a lot of animals to eat, then you ate animals. So there was no one common diet in our human evolution. So it's very hard to say that this is the exact ideal diet for everyone. It turns out that, yes, if you're eating a lot of vegetables, you're probably going to be healthier. If you're eating cleaner, leaner sources of meat, you're probably going to be healthier. If you're not eating any processed food, you're almost 100% guaranteed to be healthier. But beyond those general principles, it turns out that if we're eating a pretty high amount of protein, then protein has an appetite suppressant effect. It's thermogenic. It requires more energy to actually burn than fat and carbs do. So for equal amounts of calories of protein, carbs, and fat, we're not getting an equal amount of energy out of them. For fat, if I eat 100 calories worth of fat, I am actually getting about 99 calories of fat in my system. It only took me 1% of energy to process that fat. For sugars, for carbohydrates, it's about 4 or 5% cost. So the 100 calories, my net to my body is about 95%, 96% is going to end up as calories for me. For protein, it's about 75%. So if you're eating the same exact caloric value of all three of those foods, protein is the one that's overall the most thermogenic and nets us the least amount of calories, and takes the longest to digest. So if you're prioritizing a higher protein diet, and that does not mean you're on a ketogenic diet, it just means you're eating a good chunk of your calories are coming from protein, then you're likely to get some appetite suppressant effect from it, and you're giving your body the building blocks to retain muscle tissue. So that's my primary goal when talking about nutrition for patients is, yes, absolutely. I want you to eat, from the periphery of the grocery store. I want you to eat, vegetables and fruits and whole grains and eggs, and all of that stuff is excellent, but also make sure that you're eating the right proportions. And we calculate that amount for each patient, right? It's typically somewhere around 1.6 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. That's a lot of protein. Like, most people have to try to plan out their meals to get that amount. And so that's a shift for most people when we're having this nutrition conversation, that, okay, I don't really need you to go on a specific diet. I need you to prioritize that these are the macronutrients that are most important. And if you're getting them in this right amount, you're very likely to lose weight over the long term.